Hey, it's Ben Trigo, and we're back with the profit forecast. I have today Justin Seidenfeld from DorisDev. I'm really excited to be talking with him because we're going to talk about supply chain, product development, and everything that goes into bringing your product into the market and Justin's experience there. DorisDev is legendary in the D2C space. They're on-demand product development team. Full suite of product development services with offices in New York, and then engine manufacturing teams in Hong Kong, so they can do everything. And if you look at their client list, it's literally a who's who of D2C brands like Gravity, Blue End, Great Jones, By Humankind, Pattern, Supply, Canopy, and I think I missed about 24 or more. So Justin, welcome. I'm excited to talk with you today.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
I glossed over that intro and I left a lot out. So I think it would be great if you could sort of give a little bit of how you came to this idea, your background in the space, and, some of the current work that you're doing today.
Yeah, for sure. I will start with just kind of in summation, framing what DorisDev is, which essentially we are a full stack product development service company that helps bring product to market from ideation through shipping. So we've got internal teams to lead the work around product design, engineering, sourcing, supply chain setup and management, program management, quality control, logistics, fulfillment operations, and distribution. So really end to end. And we do that across our two offices in New York and Hong Kong. And as you mentioned, we have worked with a ton of predominantly direct-to-consumer, digitally native brands. A lot of them, we started working with them pre-revenue, so before they launched to market, helping them, bring their product to market and then support back-end supply chain setup and operations as they continue to grow. And the genesis of DorisDev actually came about, before Doris. I had been working in consumer product development for about now over 10 years, but the roots of the company actually started back when I was working at a company called Quirky, which was a VC-backed, tech-enabled product development company based in New York. A lot of people know of it from tech or VC because it was a really cool, amazing concept. We had a huge community of people around the world where we were essentially crowdsourcing ideas. And then through the platform, we bubbled up the best ideas that we would design, develop, and bring to market through our own distribution channels and operational infrastructure and all of that. And it was an amazing experience, except it ultimately spiraled into bankruptcy in a really dramatic fashion. But it was a great learning experience and got to wear many hats during my time at Quirky and met my co-founder and partner at Doris, Lucas Lappy, who's our head of product, who is a product engineer. He was actually an intern at Quirky at the time, but we connected while we were both working there. And a lot of the team from Doris actually came from Quirky after it spiraled off a cliff. And actually, DorisDev is named after the first employee in Quirky's Hong Kong office, who initially was going to be part of the Doris team, but unfortunately passed away from breast cancer the year that we started the company. So it was a nice tribute to but in short, so we were doing a lot of the work that we're doing at DorisDev back in the day at Quirky. A lot of the team members across design and supply chain management and quality control all came from Quirky. The big difference is at Quirky, we were taking kind of the capital risk, the investment into setup and cost of goods. Within the four walls of Quirky, it lived on their balance sheet. And with DorisDev, we basically have set it up such that we're a service partner where we're getting essentially hired as, a hired gun to help support all of the work that's needed to bring those products to market. But we're not necessarily taking that capital risk on setup or inventory costs ourselves. And we started the business about 6 years ago now, so we've been around for 6 years, and it's evolved, it's grown, it's changed a lot over the course of that time. And then I'll also highlight that through that period, we've also done some interesting things with the people, the process, the infrastructure, and network that we've built out. Most notably, we actually have incubated and helped to launch 2 other businesses. So one is a hardware product business called Canopy, which is a humidifier that is focused on providing healthy skin benefits. So really positioned as like a beauty tool for healthy skin. And that has its own genesis story within the 4 walls of Doris, but now is a standalone separate business that works with Doris the same way that we work with a lot of other brand partners. And it's doing really well and has its own dedicated team and own P&L and destiny and everything. And so that's been really interesting because through that experience, we've been able to kind of sit on the other side of the table as brand owners, not just as service partners. And then the other business that we incubated out of DorisDev is called Factored Quality, which is actually a software platform business that centralizes quality control operations for physical product brands. So for that business, we took work that we were doing internally at DorisDev, which was quality control operations. We partnered with a software team to basically build a digital version of the work that we were doing to manage and track everything, and then spun it out into a separate standalone company that now works with a ton of other physical product brands to support visibility and managing all of the work around quality control, product inspections, product testing, really anywhere in the world, wherever supply chains exist. So I think across the 3 businesses, DorisDev being the hub, everything kind of funnels back into this world of product development and supply chain setup and management, and really making stuff, making products.
That's awesome. That's so cool. How do people, as listening to you talk and then thinking about your customer base, like when do they, outside of factored quality, right? When do they engage with you? Is it like right at inception, or are you getting mature companies that are like, oh, I'm thinking of this like new product launch? Or...
Yeah, it's actually an interesting mix. Traditionally, or when we started the business, it really was meant to focus on kind of ground floor, startup founders. They've got an idea, but they don't necessarily know how to bring the thing to life. And it was meant to really get into the weeds of pre-revenue, pre-really brand or product existing in the world, and help kind of lead the work and set up the infrastructure and supply chain that could get handed off to them when they were ready to run it themselves. But over the last 6 years, it's definitely evolved, and we've seen, we've started to work with brand partners that are in market, and actually even some really kind of historied bigger product, businesses that are looking to figure out how to do things a little bit more quickly or more innovatively. We've been able to kind of engage them and bring our process and our approach to kind of efficient product development into their world. So it's been a really interesting mix. I would say probably our bread and butter really is, starting with an idea and then leading it through the design process, figuring out how to set up a supply chain for scale really efficiently out of the gate, incorporating that into like how we think about the design work up front. And that's where I think we kind of unlock the most value for our brand partners.
Okay. Let me come back to that, to sort of at the beginning stage. But if I were a brand that was saying, hey, I'm doing this new launch, or I want somebody to help me with my supply chain or process, are there any types of companies that are better than others for you? Like, CPG or not beauty, or
Yes,
what's sort of the right fit there?
That's a good question. Our team makeup and our network and our experience has really been in durable products.
Okay.
So really like housewares, kitchenware, electronics, connected hardware, a ton of packaging, anything durable. We have experience designing, building, and manufacturing. The 2 areas that we really don't take on or categories, I should say, we don't touch are consumables. So we don't do anything formulated or wet chemistry based. We do work with a ton of CPG brands or beauty brands or food and bev brands where we're innovating around packaging. So materials of packaging or user experience around like how the packaging gets designed and manufactured. But we're not leading the work around formulation for like the consumable part of their product offering. And then the other category is apparel, right? So we do stuff in soft goods, textiles, around, for housewares and things like that, but we're just not set up to support like fashion brands or apparel brands at scale. It's just a totally different beast in terms of like supply chain networks, as well as like operationally having to manage so many SKUs across sizing constraints and things like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now if I'm I'm a founder, I've got an idea. Is DorisDev like one of my first calls? I mean, is this like even raising money and trying to build a prototype on my own, or or are you getting people that are like, this thing's a total disaster? Go back to the drawing board.
Yeah. I mean, candidly, I love being that first call. I love having that first conversation of like, hey, I have this problem and I have this idea for a solution, and I don't know how to bring that thing to life. We basically, the way we've approached product development, and this even comes back, I mentioned Quirky, but this comes back from like the Quirky days, is really framing it around like problem, solution, and unlocking value through whatever the solution is. And our lens isn't to design something then for the sake of designing it. It's really, can whatever we're going to get to work on, is it something that can be commercialized for scale? And we think of it through that lens. So we wouldn't just take on a project where it's like, hey, we're going to design this thing and we're going to hand back pretty drawings and you can then go figure it out. We want to take on a project where we're going to design it and carry the baton all the way through manufacturing at scale. And so those initial conversations where it's like, I don't even know where to begin, we love those because there's a lot of different directions you can take an idea in. And sometimes those directions don't even involve, product, right? Like I've had conversations where it's like, I've got somebody calling saying, hey, I've got a great idea for this new thing. And after we dive into it, we realize like the best possible solution might not actually be like producing a custom new physical good in the world. It might be creating a service or, matchmaking things that already exist. And maybe that's the direction or the path that we set, the founder on. But it's the most kind of fun or exciting part of the process, which is like there's so many opportunities, so many different directions you can take it in. We love trying to figure it out. And a lot of times though too, in those first conversations, it might be that, hey, we discuss, the problem, the potential solutions, how we would frame it or think about it if it were a physical product. And then there's going to be homework that comes out of that conversation where it's like, in order to justify or come up with like the direction that we want to take, here's information that we want to kind of figure out. And in order to figure out that information, there's homework that needs to get done, whether that's like gathering sentiment, feedback from customers or potential consumers in the wild, or surveying your friends and family to get some data points on something, or whatever it might be. But there's typically like homework in that first step. And then it becomes really fun if there's homework that gets done and it unlocks something really incredible for us to get working on.
Is potential pricing part of that homework?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of problem solution, the problem landscape with product is often that product market fit just doesn't exist from a pricing perspective, right? There might be a gap or misalignment between the value that something is providing and what people are willing to pay. And so pricing sensitivity is a really important consideration, and probably the most important consideration for us when we think about whether or not there's an opportunity to introduce something new, is really like, can it exist within the landscape of all the other things that are out there? And it makes sense that somebody will pay this amount of money for whatever it is.
Yeah. I, I mean, we see, obviously, we're on the financial side, so margins are so critical. And that seems to be one of the hardest things, that for founders and D2C brands is like getting the margin structure right. And so, there's this fear often, I think, of like having prices that are too high. But if your cost of goods is too high and you have too low of a price, like you're just sort of in a trap, right? How do you, with a new product into market, feel out whether there's a premium price or a higher price for that? I can imagine if it's a brand new thing, you kind of get to set the price maybe, but if it's a better known product like a houseware, people have expectations of what those things should cost. How do you figure out pricing then?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great problem that doesn't have, an easy answer per se. But it really is probably one of the most important parts of the equation to figure out early on. And what I would typically say is we've seen brands get in trouble because of pricing, and it's typically because they're pricing things too low with the assumption that, oh, I can acquire a customer and then that's okay if I have a loss leader on my first product because I'm going to get them to buy products 2, 3, 4, or I get them on my subscription, and my subscription component is going to be so sticky that there's going to be no churn. And we've seen brands run into problems, with that in mind. The other end of it is like, coming in with too high of a price point means that you can't necessarily figure out product market fit or whether or not there really is true demand because you're pricing yourself out of it, out of consideration. So it really is it really should be treated as something that needs to be fine-tuned and refined through trial and error. And what we would typically recommend is you can always start with higher pricing and work your retail pricing down over time. It's really hard to do the inverse. And it's also, what I would say is really important to bake in kind of perspective on lifetime value for customers, whether that's through additional product offerings, even if you haven't developed anything, out of the gate, but it's through additional products down the line or subscription components down the line. It's really important to make sure that you're thinking about how you're going to increase lifetime value from your customers before you bring any new product to market, because ultimately you're going to be in the business of selling product, and at some point you're going to saturate the market with all the customers you can acquire, and you just need to be thinking about how you can be expanding your business beyond that.
Yeah, I think that's terrific advice. I think that oftentimes people's expectations of lifetime value are unrealistic, right? Like, 5, 7, 8, 9 purchases down the road, all within the first, 18 months. And then, you base your modeling plus your customer acquisition on those like future down the road purchases that can come back and haunt you.
Yeah, for sure.
And, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's something that I think shouldn't be treated as like a set it and forget it type deal. I think with pricing, I think it's important to be sensitive. It's important to be iterative and sensitive to what you're seeing as feedback from your customers, and be open to making changes. And sometimes what that means is like figuring out a merchandising strategy beyond just like this one product that we're selling, so that you can offer more value from bundling it with other things, or creating an onboarding ramp to your brand that makes it really frictionless. But I think ultimately what's important is like figuring out or being open to testing, refining, iterating on pricing until you feel like you've hit that sweet spot. You've narrowed in on product market fit from a pricing perspective.
And when you go through this analysis with a new brand, what are some of the assumptions around the reduction in COGS or per unit pricing over time. Like, how do people think through that?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think there's a really big assumption that like as you scale production volume, you're going to unlock this really efficient means of reducing COGS. And what I would say is it's not as material or drastic as most people expect out of the gate. And so it is really important to be somewhat conservative with that approach if you're solely reliant on just the raw material costs for of the product essentially being reduced over time because you're driving higher volumes. And a lot of times brands are like thinking like, well, I'm going to do 5 to 10,000 units of this thing, in the first few months, and then by the end of the year we'll be at 20,000, and next year we'll be at 40,000. You're not going to unlock those material cost savings at when we're talking about tens of thousands of unit variances. I mean, you need to be driving hundreds of thousands of units in order to really see material changes to like raw material costs. That being said, there's other opportunities. There's other levers that you can introduce to reduce your cost of goods earlier or more kind of like dramatically than just from like raw material cost savings. And a lot of times what we'll do is we basically work with brands to figure out how to get the V1 of a product to market as efficiently as possible, and then prove that there's product market fit. Start gathering feedback from customers around what they like with the product, what they don't like, what are frustrations, what are things we can improve on, and then start introducing running changes into the product that kind of turn it into this iterative process to get it better and better each time we go through production runs. And through those running changes, a lot of times what we will do is introduce cost savings. And that can be through like redesigning parts or changing aspects or elements of how we make the thing. A really easy example, and I can point to Canopy for this, is we went through probably in the first 12 months 5 to 6 different iterations or running changes to the product through the different production runs that we did on the humidifier and its packaging. And the most drastic changes we introduced was actually to the packaging of the product. So all of the primary packaging components from the first production run through the fifth, we were making iterative changes, and every time we were basically cutting out 5 to 10% of the costs associated with the packaging components that we didn't know about, we didn't realize up front, but we basically kind of baked it into our process to say, hey, every time we're gonna introduce, like we're gonna reduce the size of the footprint, we're gonna reduce the gauge of the corrugate, we're going to reduce the number of folds so that the touches at the time of kitting are going to be less. That was like a very iterative process that we did kind of through each production run.
That's cool. And what's the typical engagement period? So, new brand, you've got the product in the market, you've helped them find the right pricing. Hey, we've got product market fit. Do they stay with you forever, or at some point are they like, thanks guys, we got it from here, or how does it work?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the way we set up DorisDev, the intent is to set up a supply chain that's fully visible, fully transparent to the brand owners, so that ultimately they can take ownership when they're ready. And what that meant was early days, we were working with the founders of startups, and their primary goal necessarily wasn't to get into the weeds or the trenches of the supply chain. But as they scaled their brand, the hope was that they would hire a director of supply or director of product that would take the reins. And so a lot of the intent was we would set up that supply chain, we would stay engaged all the way until that point, and then we would go through a transition period where we were handing off the keys. What we learned, or what we realized, after the first couple years working with a number of brands, is as those brands scaled, and even when they brought in, dedicated people to lead the charge for supplier product, if they were good at what they were doing, which was typically marketing or distribution or whatever the growth expansion drivers were that they were leading, then what that meant was that they needed more help to support kind of back end operations with their supply chain, or they were investing into new product, in which case they were bringing keeping the DorisDev team engaged to help drive design and development for additional product lines. So what was really exciting for us was we kind of would engage startups to help get their supply chain set up, thinking that, okay, at some point we're going to get sunsetted out. And now 6 years later, we're working with a number of brands that we've been involved with, since pre-revenue days, and we're still driving supply chain, oversight and new product introduction. And it's been an amazing journey, and we're so lucky to be involved in kind of seeing how they've scaled their business on the front end and being able to, play a part in supporting them on the back end.
That's so cool. Because I can imagine, yeah, you would be like, oh yeah, of course they're just going to take this in house, and we'll be gone in a year or so.
Yeah.
But be able to ride that journey with them and continue to add value, and
yeah,
and I guess I would imagine it gets harder. And well, I don't know. Does it get harder to add value or as you mature the customer?
Yeah, I think the metrics or the KPIs change. Right. Early days, it's really obvious. Like, we've got to get this product to market.
Right.
We've got to hit a certain budget or schedule. Otherwise, there's no business.
Right.
And so that's very binary. But then as the businesses, as our brand partners mature and there's more team members, resources, people paying attention to more granular aspects of product and supply, then the KPIs just evolve and they just get
Right.
more and more kind of narrow and honed in on optimizing supply chains for scale.
And I'm going to ask, because I'm imagining that listeners are going to have this question. Is like, okay, I'm thinking of this. This guy sounds awesome. DorisDev sounds amazing. What's the engagement model? I mean, how do I pay for it? Yeah. Can I pay for it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, again, we love working with early stage startups. And so, all of the engagement structures and partnerships that we have, they're tied to kind of the resources that we need to pull in from DorisDev to support the work. And then, we'll scope out, we like to get creative with our partnerships. So what that means is we're not only doing like, hey, a really expensive cash-based payment structure with our partners, we're often doing engagements where we can come up with creative ways to work with, early stage startups that might be strapped for cash or, whatever resources they're strapped for. So, we've worked across the spectrum of engagements, and we're very happy to get creative if everybody's excited and aligned with what it is that we get to work on together.
That's awesome. So let's, before we started, we were sort of like, talking about when it goes well, when it goes poorly, the financial implications of those things. I think it would be really interesting for people to hear, how getting this wrong can really upend them. We talked a little bit about pricing and margin and overestimating lifetime value, as well as the decrease in COGS. But it's such a complicated, piece of the puzzle. Like, when I'm thinking about it, I just think there's got to be like 101 different ways for it to go wrong.
Yeah, I mean, even that's like an understatement. There's
1,001.
There's so many traps, and the old saying that everyone says is like, whatever you think it's going to cost and how long it's going to take, you've got to at least double or triple it on both both dimensions. But there's so
that's like really true. Like, that's a decent rule of thumb.
Yeah, decent rule of thumb is like, look, if you think it's going to cost you, $50,000, there's no way it's going to cost you double that. And if somebody told you it's going to take 6 months, make sure you put 12 months into the schedule.
Okay.
And I think like everything, when you're dealing with physical things, everything is just a lot harder and more definitive than digital products. And what that means is if you make mistakes, then they can be really costly in terms of money and time. With physical goods, if you're making something that requires tooling, so kind of any type of molds to do custom molded parts or injected parts, then you're talking about tens of thousands of dollars and at least 1 month of mold fabrication time. So if you make a mistake that requires you to redesign or redo that, then you're talking about scrapping tens of thousands of dollars on setup and having to spend another at least month fabricating a new set of molds. And so, yeah, it's really important to be confident going into locking in designs and confident that what you're investing in from a time and money perspective, what's going to come out on the other side is going to be right. And I think candidly, that's it's scary and it's hard, but that's why we got into the product development and supply chain work to begin with, is we liked the challenge. We might be, the team jokes, we might be, somewhat a glutton for pain and punishment sometimes, because it's never easy. It's never a walk in the park, but it's exciting and it's fun.
So, okay, I've don't underestimate your costs. Don't underestimate your times. Think through the getting the tooling right. What about like choosing your suppliers and then getting it from wherever, China back to the States? Like how much can I screw up that?
Yeah. I mean, that's going to be one of the most important parts of getting something to market successfully, is finding the right partners, the right manufacturing partners. It's a marriage, right? You're getting into bed with somebody that you're going to be working with for months to years to even longer if you do it right. And so, and there's investment. Everyone kind of thinks that it's this unilateral relationship where I'm paying somebody and they're going to give me these goods, and therefore, as the buyer, it's very unilateral, but that's really not the case at all. There is this there should always be, treated as such, but this mutual beneficial relationship between manufacturer and customer, because they're investing energy, time, and really bandwidth to support bringing something, new to market. And again, I'm assuming that we're talking about custom product here, not just, buying an off-the-shelf, open tool product. And so it's really important to approach the relationship through that lens. And, I always also say that your contract manufacturer is really the first investor that you need to convince to get into bed with you, right? Your pitch should be as sharp and as compelling for your contract manufacturer as it is for you going out to pitch some VC or fundraising potential partner, because you need to convince them that this is a good use of their time, their energy, their effort, that you're going to be, there's only upside by engaging with you. And that can also translate into really impactful, having a really big impact on your ability to kind of extend your runway. Because when you get into product development and manufacturing at scale, cash flow is king, and having access to capital is the most important thing for maintaining your kind of lifeblood. And one of the easiest and most direct ways to do that is to work through mutually beneficial payment terms for you as a customer with your manufacturing partner. And so it's really important. We believe it's really important to approach the relationship as a partnership, be transparent with plans and potential opportunities, and making sure that your manufacturers feel like a true partner, because you're going to then be able to extend that into a really potentially lucrative relationship in terms of managing your cash flow.
Well, I love that, because that we talk about that to our customers all the time, that your best source of capital and your least expensive source of capital is better terms from your supplier. So do whatever you can to get better terms. What are mistakes that companies make on that front? Do they, I mean, okay, so they're not transparent, but do companies like, not make their payments on time
Yeah. Oh,
or,
yeah.
you know,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. That's, I mean, the most common issue is probably just on-time payments with manufacturing partners, and maybe they're not chasing you because you're only 20 days late or 30 days late, and you're not getting that reminder, but they're tracking. They're seeing what is the typical kind of days out payment cycle, payment timing with their AP, and they're taking note. And being closed off, not being really transparent, or not being forthcoming or considerate of kind of cadence with development. I think a lot of times there isn't consideration that there's a lot of resources on the back end that go into all of the work through development, and so the expectation is, hey, I'm going to pay you this deposit to get started on work, and then we're going to get to this milestone, and then now I'm going to take a month or 2 months or 3 months to like do what I need to do while you sit and wait. And then when I come back to you, I'm going to put pressure again on like racing to production, and not being considerate that there's a ton of resources, energy, and effort that go into hitting those milestones, or the work that's happening on their end then translates into just having a bad taste in their mouth, potentially around like, hey, these guys aren't a considerate partner, or didn't give us a heads up that we were going to be sitting on our hands for 3 months while they got their go-to-market strategies or their financing in order, or whatever it is. I think if you're upfront about like, hey, we're going to be working through development together, we need to get to this milestone so that I can go get our capital needed to get through this next phase, and being upfront about that is a conversation that should be had, and then I think there would be kind of mutual understanding, and going into the full kind of development cycle.
I realized that because you have an office in Hong Kong, I've just assumed that everything we're talking about on the supplier side and the manufacturing side is China. But is that true, or do you?
Yeah, historically that's where our roots for manufacturing was based, and then our sourcing and manufacturing kind of management team is based in Hong Kong. We've seen a ton of interest, and then kind of pushing for nearshoring or onshoring for production over the last couple of years. So we have transitioned some types of supply production to other places outside of China, in the U.S. and Mexico, even within Asia, Southeast Asia, Taiwan. We've seen a lot of basically focus and investment going into pushing outside of just mainland China. That being said, for certain product categories, we've found it to be incredibly challenging to move outside of China, simply because the know-how, the infrastructure, the flexibility, the barrier for engagement, is so accessible in China, even with all of the challenges and the trade war implications and all of that. We've still seen that it's hard to compete from a pricing and flexibility standpoint outside of China for a lot of product categories. But it's definitely something that we've seen a ton of interest on, and a ton of energy going into basically brands saying, hey, we really need to explore what our supply options are for outside of China.
Yeah, I can imagine. And it almost imagines like Doris. It almost sounds like DorisDev is like a translation layer between the American, or I don't know if you have customers in Europe, and Chinese suppliers and manufacturers, and the kind of cultural ways, or is that is it so common now that like, yeah, it's no big deal? Or do you guys still find yourself kind of helping both sides through the process?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important dimension to it, right? There's kind of cultural nuances or expectations around manufacturing in China. But I think beyond that, there's also just a ton of know-how and experience for just manufacturing at scale or going from 0 to 1 to scale that our team brings that might be specific to kind of the geographic region in Asia, but also we can apply to manufacturing elsewhere as well. And so it's not. I would say there's definitely we're definitely biased because we have a network and a really robust network of manufacturing partners all over China, and we've got great relationships that we're able to leverage and open the kimono, open the door up for startups that they wouldn't have access to otherwise. But we wouldn't, we don't. I would say we wouldn't just limit ourselves to just China.
Yep. Let me switch gears a little. Obviously supply chain, it's been we can't stop talking about it for the past 2 years. Were you caught off guard by this, or were you like, of course this thing's going to melt down? Like,
I mean, we were definitely did not expect as as crazy of a tidal wave and ripple effect that we saw over the last 2 years. But we were bracing. I mean, candidly, we were bracing for other problems and other kind of points of friction before COVID, with kind of an escalating trade war and the considerations that was bringing between China and the U.S. And I think COVID brought just a totally different problem into the fold, but very similar in the sense that it just limited our ability to be as flexible or as nimble with setting up new supply chains for scale in the region, or being able to find contract manufacturers that were as open or had as much flexibility to engage earlier stage companies. All that being said, it's been an opportunity to to flex different muscles and to and to approach the problem with different solutions. And I think our team, what's been really nice is our team in general has been working and focused on working with startups for forever, and so very much used to kind of being nimble and rolling with the punches and figuring stuff out on the fly. And so I think this was just another, the last couple of years have just been another example of where our team has been able to, showcase their ability to be nimble and figure stuff out.
Yeah, that's awesome. I can imagine. Well, I can't imagine. The calls and the emails.
Yeah.
Zoom all hours of the day and night that you guys must have been going through.
Yeah, we've definitely gotten some. We've worked through some really challenging, some really weird challenges over the last couple of years, and have some pretty outrageous stories and experiences in general. Vendors closing up shop or being locked down, and I mean, there's just been a pretty wild swing of all different things that we've experienced. But I think that's par for the course in hardware development and supply chain operations.
Yeah.
Like, there's just a lot. You're dealing with humans. You're dealing with like a lot of moving parts, and so there's always going to be fires to put out and problems to deal with.
Yeah. Will we ever return to sort of like a 2020 world of, or is it is it always going to be kind of screwed up, or is it screwed up for the next 5 years? Or
I think that there's some, the pendulum is swinging it to some degree back to where we were, right? We're seeing a softening of prices of import freight, and we're seeing more access and flexibility from contract manufacturing partners, there's still a ton of, essentially cost implications around inflation or even just raw material costs that we are seeing affecting bottom line. We've seen a ton of contract manufacturers disappear, over the last period. So there's definitely have been big swings and changes to the overall landscape, and I don't know that we're going to get the pendulum's going to swing all the way back to where it was pre-COVID, but I think that there's going to be some new semblance of normalcy that lives between the crazy extreme of COVID times and where we were leading up to that point.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure DTC founders would rather have not gone through all this, but there is I think, a longer term benefit. That the world of DTC used to be like, yeah, you just you buy something in China and you put it on a boat and then you run some Instagram ads and how hard can this be, right? And this exposed, both on the advertising side and the supply chain side, that there's a lot of complexity to this business. But if you underestimate those key parts of your business, it can come back on you really hard, and make it very difficult to get profitable or get capital. So I do think that this will have a good benefit. People now have religion around supply chain and manufacturing processes.
For sure. I think that
the importance of services.
Yeah, I think there's a greater respect and understanding for the complexities, of supply chain challenges and what that really means, not just kind of like a sexy headline. I also think that the bigger implications are that it will, it's making things more challenging, and the markets are just getting more competitive. So with all those things that are happening, what that's doing is really helping to weed out, basically brands that might not, have the legs or the stomach to really, flourish. What it's doing is it's reinforcing that the brands that do have that, have the right infrastructure, the right kind of, capabilities and ability to showcase innovation and meet customer needs and, unlock value for customers through providing solution or whatever it is. I think that the current climate and conditions are really just going to reinforce that those brands, should exist and they'll do really well.
As you were saying that, I was thinking, you've seen dozens and dozens, hundreds of companies and founders. And so what traits do those founders have that can build the companies that can flourish and survive? Or maybe on the flip side, what traits do you see in founders where you're I don't even want to work with them, this thing's going to be a nightmare, a disaster?
I think there's two kind of traits, we'll call it three traits that are really important, which are persistence, curiosity, and proactiveness. And I think that for all of the founders that we work with, those are traits that they have to embody, because diving into a hardware startup is really, really hard, really stressful, and really there's just a lot of points of friction to try to navigate. But those three traits are really important to help kind of figure it out and work through the hard times. So persistence just means that that there's going to be challenges and you're willing to dive in head first and figure it out and not give up and kind of keep your legs pumping as you go through those challenges. Curiosity is, I need to understand, these aspects of the business that are going to be important and how things affect each other so I can make the right decisions and not just rely on being told X, Y, or Z. And then proactiveness is, they've got the ability to be a self-starter and not have to wait to be told to do something, and they're going to go figure it out for themselves. And I think those three traits are really, I think, for at least from my experience, that's what boils down to being able to successfully navigate through the challenges that most of the startups that we deal with will face.
Okay, so what about the traits that when you see them, you're like, I don't care, I don't care who wrote
Yeah.
your seed or your check. We're not doing this.
Yeah, I mean, I think like one of the ones that are top of mind, is probably the inverse of the curiosity trait, which is um, not being inquisitive or wanting to understand why or how, and just kind of doing it blindly without having the inherent kind of inquisitiveness to understand. I think that often will translate into somebody who can make the wrong decision for the wrong reason and not understand why it's the wrong decision.
Right.
I think that you're always, unfortunately, through the the course of starting a new business or whatever it is that you're doing, you're going to make wrong decisions, and that's totally fine. But you have to come out of it understanding why it was the wrong decision or why it was a mistake. And I don't think that you can do that if you don't, if you're not necessarily curious or you don't want to understand the why.
Yeah. How much of an advantage is experience? If a founder has done something like this before, is it just 10x easier, or is it?
It's interesting. It's kind of it can be a double-edged sword. Like, experience brings a ton of value and benefit, and for sure it will help inform how to do something efficiently based off of what that person did previously. But it also kind of can potentially put blinders on for how to approach problems or how to approach something that somebody who's inexperienced or new to a category or new to to whatever might bring a fresh perspective or fresh take on it. And so we've seen, there's a balance. You don't want somebody who is going to lead with naivety and, again, not be curious to want to understand the why. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to figure it out. And then vice versa,
Right.
Somebody super experienced might be too closed-minded to be open to trying something in a new way. So I think that it's not. I think maybe there's trade-offs. Life is a game of trade-offs, I think, and it's just figuring out what you want to optimize for within your set of conditions and constraints, and I think that's one of those set of conditions.
Justin, is there anything that you wish I had asked, or?
Ben, I think you did a good job asking really good questions about the process. I think one big takeaway I would share is really just going into it wanting to learn and get exposure to as much as possible. Talking to as many people that have been through it, reaching out, asking questions, reading, listening, learning as much, because there is no one way to do hardware development or supply chain setup and management. There's no silver bullet approach. Even though I've been doing it for over 10 years, and we get paid the big bucks to do it on behalf of brands, there isn't a silver bullet approach that we would take to the process. We have best practices, but there's nuanced things to understand and figure out as you go through it. And so the only way to really approach it is to be open-minded and to have as much exposure and understanding going into the process.
I love it. All right, so people can find you and DorisDev at doris.dev.
Yep.
And is that where they start the process if they want to reach out to you?
You can reach out to info@dorisdev.com, or always open to getting a cold email, justin@dorisdev.com. And
You'll get a lot of cold emails. Well, I don't know. Maybe nobody, our podcast, in a year from now, when our audience is huge.
Yeah, that's true. If it's not for me, I'll point it in the direction of somebody who can be more helpful than I can.
Nice, awesome. All right.